boys and girls, I'm going to read you a story today called Mr. Men Sports Day by Roger Hargreaves. We're thinking of doing a bit of a sports day theme this week in school or at home, because normally we would have a sports day, but because we can't, we just thought we'd have a bit of a sports day sort of theme. And I've got a lovely story about Mr. Men having sports day. It's a bit funny, all set in a place called Nonsense Land. Have you ever been to Nonsense Land? In Nonsense Land, the grass is blue and the trees are red, and all the cars have square wheels. Why? Easy, so they don't roll away when they're parked on a hill. I know, what nonsense. And in Nonsense Land, they hold a sports day every summer. Nothing silly about that, I hear you say. Well, you'll just have to wait and see. This year, the preparations for the sports day started 2 weeks before the event, and it being Nonsense Land, things happened somewhat differently to how you would have expected. Little Miss Scatterbrain got the sports field ready. Can you see she's hoovering the field? Mr. Dizzy marked out the track for the races. They're a bit wonky, aren't they? And Mr. Nonsense got the finishing line ready. A very silly looking finishing line. It's actually a fishing rod, isn't it? The day of Nonsense Land Sports Day dawned to a great deal of excitement. All the Mr. Men were there, and no one was more excited than Mr. Rush, who was at the sports day for the very first time. He couldn't wait for the last event of the day, the 100-metre sprint. But for the first time in his life, he did wait. There are lots of events to watch first. However, as each one came and went, Mr. Rush became more and more excited. The high jump became the low jump and was won by Mr. Small. Look, it's made out of matchsticks, the jump. And the long jump was the short jump, and it was won by Little Miss Tiny. Throwing the hammer became throwing the jelly, and that was won by Mr. Strong, whose jelly went a bit further than he intended it to. Uh-oh. Miss Splendid. Little Miss Naughty was leading all the way in the sack race, but Mr. Nosy won it by a nose. For the swimming gala, Mr. Silly had filled the swimming pool with custard. Mr. Tickle won by a hand, on the end of his extraordinarily long arm. And the egg and spoon race became the raw egg and spoon race. Oh, much trickier and a lot messier. Finally, it was time for the 100-metre sprint. Mr. Rush and all the other runners took their places at the starting line. The starting pistol fired and Mr. Rush shot down the track before you could say 6 speedy sausages. He had crossed the finishing line. "I've won!" cried Mr. Rush. Everyone gathered around for the prize presentation. Mr. Rush could not wait to hear the announcement. The King of Nonsense Land stood up on stage. "In third place," he said, "is Mr. Silly for the silliest running shoes ever. In second place," he continued, "is Little Miss Dotty for the silliest running outfit. And in first place, for being by far the silliest 100-metre sprint, is Mr. Slow." But Mr. Slow didn't even run. Look, he hasn't even finished yet, cried Mr. Rush, who could not believe what he'd just heard. Exactly, said the King. He walked. What could be sillier than entering a running race and then not even running? And here he comes now. Poor Mr. Rush hadn't realised the event was called the silliest 100-metre sprint. But that's nonsense, said Mr. Rush. Exactly, said Mr. Slow. Complete nonsense. and he stepped forward to collect his cup. A teacup. Did you enjoy that? It's quite a funny, silly book, isn't it? Have you got a favourite silly race? I quite like the one in the custard, or the raw egg and spoon race. That would be a bit silly and messy, wouldn't it? Wouldn't really like to do that in real life, it would be a bit sticky. Okay, have fun doing your sports day activities this week, boys and girls, and I hope you enjoyed the story. Bye-bye!